I call the honourable member Chris Ockenroll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Because I felt, not that I wish to be critical of Mr. Ian Lees-Galloway, and congratulations to him on his new position, but far be it from me to be critical, but I just thought the bill was losing a little momentum in his speech, and it was sort of getting a bit personalised, because this, I think, is a strong and sensible piece of legislation that will work well. It will work well. It was, I must say, one of the more interesting bills that we had through the Select Committee. It's a substantial piece of legislation in its scope and reach, and being an omnibus bill, it embraces a whole range of legislative detail. The submissions that came forward, especially affecting Part 1 of the bill, were from a blend of local authorities and mercantile marine interests, all of whom, I think, are to be complimented on the sincerity and the depth of knowledge that they displayed in their submission. They're experts in their subjects and put forward a lot of practical information from a user point of view that was useful to the committee's consideration, especially, I might say, on this business of alcohol consumption. Oh, really? These are people who know their stuff. Not that Mr. Lees-Galloway doesn't know his stuff, but these were the guys who made the submissions, and I found them very substantial. The significance of the bill is one of economic and environmental importance. These two elements go hand in hand in a successful society, albeit that the Greens would like to chop them apart. And this government, I think, can be justifiably proud of the progress New Zealand is making through its reforms, Mr. Chairman. These reforms that are included in this bill provide enhanced environmental effects management, we'll come to that in Part 2, greater certainty and reduced compliance costs for industry, increased efficiency from avoiding the duplication of processes, and the opportunity for improved public and iwi participation. This highlights the national government's commitment to build a more competitive and productive economy. In terms of the Part 1, there are a number of key achievements in the maritime transport sector that this bill brings about. It addresses gaps in the current legislation, it aligns regional and national interests, and it sets penalties for offences within its scope that are consistent with other comparable offending. This includes, Mr. Chairman, penalties for overloading ships, failing to comply with internationally recognised alcohol limits, and knowingly breaching requirements for the carriage of dangerous goods. This bill has provided for conducting a value-for-money review with Maritime New Zealand to improve the services and reduce the cost. This is not just something that's been dreamed up, it's a tested, well-discussed series of changes. It has developed the qualifications and operational limits framework, ensuring the safety of vessels, their crew, passengers and cargo. And, Mr. Chairman, one only has to dwell briefly on some of the tragedies that we read about rust buckets being used in overseas countries which don't have this sort of legislation, and the dreadful death that results from that. Published port productivity data will improve the flow of exports through our ports, and may I just mention at this point how nice it is to hear that Lyttelton Port has had a tremendous acceleration in exports over the last year, Mr. Chairman. This has made changes to the maritime rules around the fishing boats, which will improve safety, lift compliance and better needs to the industry. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend this bill to the House.
I call the Honourable Marianne Street.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise to speak to Part 1 of the Marine Legislation Bill, currently under discussion. Previous colleagues on this side of the House have traversed some of the issues that have exercised me about this particular part, namely the delay in this bill coming to the House, so I won't traverse that again unduly. But similarly, my colleague Moana Maki, she did also raise the issue about the bunker oil convention and that protocol surrounding that, and why that hadn't been pursued with more rapidity by this government. And other colleagues have talked about the completely indefensible difference around alcohol limits for those in charge of vessels at sea vis-à-vis people in charge of a motor vehicle on land. So I don't need to go over those things again, but what I do want to go to, Mr. Chairman, there are two things I want to talk about. One is that section 62, it's a new part 26A to be inserted, and it is the bit about civil liability for pollution of marine environment from marine structures. And the other thing I wish to talk about is the reference in the national interest analysis to the protocol relating to intervention on the high seas in case of pollution by substances other than oil. And this is the intervention protocol. Now, this is included in the material that's in front of us today for consideration, Mr. Chair. One of the things that has emerged from the dreadful incident that was the wrecking of the Rena.
Order. Whoever has the radio on, it's not permitted. And, yeah. Well, it's no different than the telephone. If it's in the house, it should be switched off. This is not a, this is a debating chamber. Call the Honourable Member Mary Ann Street.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before I was rudely interrupted, I was talking about the intervention protocol. And the thing that is emerging from the wreck of the Rena on the Astrolabe Reef off Tauranga is that while the oil was the thing that was immediately obvious and of immediate damage to the environment, and there was a great deal of effort put into the cleaning up of the oil discharge from the vessel into the water, what is emerging now is that there is ongoing environmental damage from substances other than oil and from structures, marine structures that are defined in the bill. But it appears that the cargo on board the Rena and various containers full of material are still leaking into the water around the Astrolabe Reef. That the vessel itself, the bit that's remaining of the vessel itself, is a hazard. There is damage that is being done to the environment by things other than the oil that originally came out of that tragedy. And so I'm pleased to see, belatedly, though it be, that there is some consideration of civil liability for pollution of the marine environment from marine structures, which is any offshore installation, a pipeline, a facility, a site, a structure or thing used to transfer a harmful substance to or from a ship or an offshore installation, is going to be covered, and the civil liability for pollution from those things is to be covered under this bill. Mr. Chairman, I want to go to the in particular to the protocol relating to intervention on the high seas in cases of pollution by substances other than oil, which is the intervention protocol. As I understand it, Mr. Chairman, this was amongst the things that were considered by the previous Mr. Chairman.
The Honourable Mary Ann Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was one of the things, as I understand it, and somebody could correct me if I'm wrong about this, but it was one of the things that was considered by the former Labour government in its preparation of a number of conventions that needed updating and ratification in this area, and was included in the select committee material which has resulted in this piece of legislation